Usually when we think about a story, there's this underlying expectation of gravity, I guess.
Right. It's almost like physics, like a natural law.
Yeah, exactly. You start at the top of the hill, you roll down, you gather momentum, and eventually, inevitably, you just hit the bottom.
It's highly directional. It feels inescapable. And, more importantly, it mimics how we perceive our own aging process and our daily lives, just one foot in front of the other.
Right. It's safe. It's how we expect the world to work. But then you step into the world of postmodern cinema, and suddenly the director takes that hill and completely inverts it.
Oh, they shatter the hill entirely.
Yeah. The arrow just snaps in half. You're rolling upwards, you're stopping midair, or you're somehow at the bottom before you ever took a single step. We're looking at a narrative landscape that is, honestly, a total paradox.
It's the active, deliberate orchestration of temporal chaos. And I have to say, it is incredibly difficult to pull off without completely alienating the audience.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we have a mission that is going to bend your mind a little bit. We're exploring the intersection of deep philosophical concepts and nonlinear narrative structures in modern movies.
It's a fascinating overlap.
It really is. I've been going through this massive stack of research for this deep dive. There's a really comprehensive educational brief by Itai Mar on postmodern cinema, plus some incredibly dense academic glossaries on the philosophy of time.
And that timeline of academic work spanning from the 90s to 2014, right?
Yes, exactly. And the overarching theme here, the thing that really jumped out at me, is that the movies we watch on a Friday night with a bucket of popcorn are actually smuggling in some of the heaviest, most complex ideas about human existence ever conceived.
They absolutely are. I mean, we tend to separate high philosophy from popular entertainment, right? We assume that if something has a massive blockbuster budget, it can't possibly be dealing with Kantian metaphysics or Sartrean existentialism.
Well, that's for textbooks, not for the multiplex.
Exactly. But the structural mechanics of these films tell a completely different story. The way a director arranges time on screen is, in itself, a philosophical argument. It's meant to challenge the average viewer who might not have any academic background at all.
So to the listener, I want you to think about your absolute favorite movie. Call to mind the very first opening scene. Does it start at the chronological beginning, move steadily to the middle, and finish neatly at the end?
For most classics, yeah, it does.
But does it scramble the timeline? Does it show you the ending first, jump back 10 years, slide sideways into a dream sequence, and then leave you to piece the entire puzzle together on the drive home?
Which happens a lot more than we realize.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because these scrambled nonlinear films aren't just a cool stylistic trick to look edgy, they are profound experiments. They are actively testing your understanding of reality, of destiny, and of free will.
To really get to the bottom of how they achieve this, we have to start with the fundamental blueprint of narrative construction. The research makes a very sharp, crucial distinction between two terms that most of us, honestly, use completely interchangeably in casual conversation.
Oh, you mean story and plot?
Yes. Story and plot.
I'll admit, before diving into this material, I definitely thought story and plot were the exact same thing. You ask someone, hey, what's the story of that movie, or what's the plot? And you expect the exact same answer.
And that's a very natural assumption to make, but structurally, they are radically different beasts. The story, or what some theorists actually call the fabula, is the full chronological sequence of events as they actually happened in the universe of the film.
So it's the objective reality.
Precisely. It is the objective reality of the events, moving predictably from point A to point B to point C.
Yeah.
If a character is born in 1980, goes to college in 1998, and solves a crime in 2010, that chronological progression is the story.
It's the raw data. It's what you would read if you pulled the character's actual police file or medical records.
That's a great way to put it. The plot, on the other hand, the sujet, is the specific, curated, and sometimes incredibly chaotic order in which the filmmaker chooses to present those events to you, the viewer.
So the plot is basically the delivery system.
Exactly. So in a classical linear narrative, the plot and the story are perfectly aligned. You experience the events exactly as they unfold in time. The delivery system completely matches the chronological reality.
Which is comforting, honestly. It reflects our everyday, assumed perception of reality. I mean, it's how I experience my Tuesday. I wake up, I eat breakfast, I go to work, I don't eat breakfast, go to sleep, and then wake up yesterday to realize my breakfast was actually a dream.
Right. A linear plot aligns with human biological rhythms. It provides a straightforward emotional journey. You are introduced to a character, you build an attachment to them, you watch them face an obstacle, and you experience the catharsis of the resolution. It's the classic hero's journey. But a nonlinear plot actively, sometimes violently, disrupts this alignment. It separates the story from the plot. It uses temporal jumps, flashbacks, flash forwards, and multiple, sometimes totally contradictory perspectives.
But wait, if the linear structure is so comforting and it perfectly matches how our brains naturally process a Tuesday, why break it? Why take a perfectly good, easy-to-understand chronological story and smash it into a million pieces? It seems like you're just risking frustrating your audience.
It's a massive risk, but the disruption is the entire point. By breaking the timeline, filmmakers are stripping away your passive comfort.
Making you work for it.
Yes. When you watch a linear film, you are essentially a passenger on a train. You look out the window, the scenery passes by, and you just trust the conductor to get you to the station. When a filmmaker breaks the timeline, they derail the train and hand you the map.
Oh, wow.
They are challenging you to become an active participant in the creation of the narrative. You have to literally reconstruct the story out of the plot in your own mind.
You're doing the editing work in your seat.
You are. And in doing so, this complex structure induces a very deliberate sense of temporal chaos. It forces the viewer to actively question reality rather than just absorbing it. You are no longer just asking what happens next. You are constantly asking, when is this happening? Is this real? Is this a memory? Has this already happened?
It's like, let me try an analogy here, because there was this really weird piece of geographical trivia in the sources that I haven't been able to stop thinking about.
Okay, let's hear it.
If watching a linear story is like driving on a long, straight highway, watching a nonlinear story is like discovering that the road you're on has suddenly been renamed and rerouted right underneath your tires, even though you haven't turned the steering wheel.
That's a compelling way to frame it. Where does the geography trivia come in?
So the research notes this specific event on January 26, 2014. Involving Montana State Highway 2.
Okay.
This highway extends from Butte to Three Forks in Montana. Previously, this exact literal stretch of pavement was conceptually defined on all the maps as a part of U.S. Route 10.
Right.
Now, the physical space, the actual asphalt, the dirt underneath it, the trees on the side of the road, it did not move a single inch. But its identity in the timeline and the structural map of the highway system was completely redefined overnight. The label changed, which changed how you navigated, even though the physical reality remained static. So how does that mirror what these directors are doing with time?
That is a brilliant physical representation of a concept the texts call time points.
Time points. Okay.
A time point is a specific location in time used to indicate events and their various properties in reality. The pavement in Montana is the event itself, the physical, objective reality of the story.
The raw data again?
Exactly. The designation calling it U.S. Route 10 versus calling it Highway 2 is the time point. It's the conceptual label, the plot that we slap onto the raw data to make sense of our journey.
So the director's just changing the highway signs on us as we drive.
They are swapping the signs, reversing the mile markers, and sometimes putting up signs for towns that don't even exist yet. And this introduces a massive philosophical debate highlighted in the glossary materials.
About what time actually is.
Yes. It asks a fundamental question. Are time points an actual physical reality? Is Tuesday at 4 p.m. a tangible thing in the universe? Or are time points just a theoretical concept, a cognitive illusion we've invented because our human brains simply cannot handle the infinite, terrifying fluidity of existence?
I mean, we need the clock to function, right? We need the highway signs or we get lost.
We do. But the texts point out that time itself is fundamentally defined by change. Without matter shifting from one state to another, how do we measure time passing? If absolutely nothing moves, if no physical state alters in the entire universe, does time even exist?
That is heavy. So when a filmmaker abruptly cuts a scene, jumping back 5 years without warning, they're essentially arguing that these time points we rely on are completely arbitrary. They're just tools to be manipulated, not absolute laws of physics.
Exactly. They are demonstrating that the asphalt of the character's life, their trauma, their love, their death remains the same, but the route you, the viewer, are taking to understand it can be radically altered.
And that changes everything about how we feel about it.
It changes your entire perception of what the journey means. And this brings us right to the doorsteps of the philosophers. Because when a director manipulates a time point, they aren't just playing with cinematic technique, they're playing with classical philosophy. They're essentially sitting these ancient and modern thinkers in the director's chair.
This is the part of the research I found most mind-blowing. The sources talk about how cinema uniquely merges the abstract products of thought, which is what philosophy is, right? Just ideas in the ether with a highly sensory, visceral, visual experience, which is art.
It's the perfect medium for it.
It is. We're taking people like Aristotle, Kant, Rousseau, and Sartre, and we're translating their incredibly dense textbooks into car chases, explosions, and dramatic monologues.
Let's start with Aristotle, because he is the bedrock of Western storytelling. If you read Aristotle's Poetics, his entire framework for art and narrative is deeply rooted in logic, structure, and absolute causality.
Cause and effect.
Right. He famously stated that a story must have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Everything must follow a rigorous logical progression. Event A causes event B, which necessitates event C.
Which is the ultimate linear highway.
It is. So the monumental challenge for a postmodern, non-linear filmmaker is, how on earth do you maintain an Aristotelian logical through line when you have completely shattered the chronological sequence of time?
Because if you show the ending for, say, the main character getting shot, and then you jump to a scene of them eating a sandwich 5 years prior, how do you keep the audience from just throwing their hands up and saying, well, none of this makes sense, there's no cause and effect here?
You solve it by shifting the axis of logic. You move away from chronological causality, where time is the engine, and you shift to emotional or thematic causality.
Okay, wait, explain that.
The events might not happen in the order dictated by a clock on the wall, but the emotional journey of the character still follows a rigorous logical progression. The filmmaker connects scenes based on an association of ideas, a progression of a psychological state, or a thematic revelation.
So it still makes sense, just not chronologically.
Exactly. The Aristotelian logic still exists, but it's operating on a much deeper psychological layer. You see the character get shot, and then you see them eating a sandwich 5 years earlier, but perhaps during that sandwich, they make a tiny, selfish decision that you, the audience, suddenly realize is the very root cause of their eventual murder.
Oh, wow.
The causality is there, you just had to bridge the gap yourself.
Okay, that makes sense. You're trading a timeline for a theme line. But the sources also bring up Immanuel Kant. And this is where I need you to help me, because Kant is notoriously dense.
He is definitely not light reading.
No. So how does an 18th century German philosopher fit into modern movie editing?
Kant is absolutely vital here. One of Kant's most revolutionary ideas, part of his transcendental idealism, is his argument about the nature of space and time. Before Kant, people generally thought of time as a container, like a giant empty box that the universe sits inside, and things happen within that box.
Sure, that's how I think of it.
But Kant argued that time is not a physical property of the external world. He argued that time is an a priori intuition of the human mind.
Meaning what exactly? Like time is just in our heads?
Essentially, yes. Kant believed that time is the cognitive framework, the internal software that our brains use to organize sensory data so that the world makes sense to us. It's a lens built into our perception. We literally cannot perceive the world without structuring it temporally.
Hold on. If Kant says time is just a cognitive lens in our brain, are you saying that when a director uses nonlinear editing, they are basically reaching into the audience's mind and swapping out that lens?
Yeah. That is exactly what they're doing, and that's why it feels so visceral and sometimes uncomfortable. If time is just the way we organize reality, then a director who scrambles time is actively forcing your brain to reorganize its fundamental perception of reality.
They're hacking our brains.
They're hacking the Kantian software. They're proving that the order of events is subjective, dependent entirely on the consciousness perceiving them.
That is wild. They are turning the audience's brain into a philosophical testing ground. And then there's Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The research touches on his ideas as well. How does Rousseau connect to a scrambled plot? I usually associate him with political philosophy, the social contract, that kind of thing.
It's a brilliant connection. Think about Rousseau's core premise. Man is born free and everywhere he is in chains.
Right.
He argued that humans in their natural state are inherently free and authentic, but the artificial structures of society, institutions, and imposed rules bind us, restrict us, and force us into unnatural behaviors.
Okay, I'm following the political angle, but how does that translate to cinema?
Think of the chronological linear plot as the societal constraint. The strict beginning-to-end format is an artificial rule imposed on the raw, natural chaos of human memory and experience.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
When a nonlinear filmmaker breaks the chronology, they are theoretically stripping away those artificial chains. They are attempting to present the story in a more natural, emotionally authentic state, free from the rigid, imposed laws of sequential time.
They want to show how it actually feels.
Yes. They are trying to show human experience as it is felt, rather than how it is categorized by a societal clock.
Wow. So breaking the timeline is an act of artistic rebellion against structural constraint. That brings us perfectly to the next heavyweight, Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist. Because if breaking the timeline is an act of rebellion, things get really wild when you apply Sartre.
Sartre is arguably the most central figure to understanding the psychological weight of nonlinear cinema. Existentialism, at its very core, emphasizes absolute, radical free will.
Existence precedes essence.
Exactly, his famous maxim. You are not born with a predetermined destiny. You don't have an inherent, unchangeable nature given to you by a higher power. You define yourself, moment by moment, entirely through your choices. You are nothing else but the sum of your actions.
Wait, I have to push back on this.
Go ahead.
If Sartre believes in absolute radical free will, isn't a film director explicitly taking away the character's free will by editing them out of order? If the timeline is jumping around, the characters feel like they are just trapped in a predetermined edit. You already know their future, so they have no freedom.
It seems like a contradiction, but it actually achieves the exact opposite effect. Let's look at the bigger picture of how we consume media. A traditional, linear film often creates a powerful illusion of destiny. We watch a character progress from their humble beginnings, overcome obstacles, and finally achieve their goal.
Like it was meant to be.
Exactly. By the time the credits roll, it feels like they were always meant to end up there. The linear progression creates a comforting blanket of inevitability.
Like it was written in the stars.
But nonlinear films use disjointed timelines to violently rip that blanket away. They highlight what Sartre called the unbearable weight of choice, the nausea of total freedom.
Break that down for me. How does scrambling the edit create the weight of choice?
Let's look at a hypothetical scenario. If you show the audience the tragic, violent death of a character in the very first 5 minutes of the film, you have established an absolute, undeniable reality. That character is dead.
Right.
Then you jump back a week to show that same character going about their normal life, making seemingly minor, mundane decisions. Should I take this job? Should I get in this car? Should I trust this person?
Because we already know they die, those choices feel totally different.
Exactly. Suddenly, those past choices don't feel like mere stepping stones on a smooth path to destiny. They feel loaded with intense, agonizing, existential dread.
Because we know what's coming.
Yes. You see the sheer absurdity and the terrifying weight of their free will, because you, the viewer, know the terrible outcome of those choices, but the character is just radically, blissfully free in that moment, actively choosing the path that leads to their doom.
That is so dark.
It is. It makes you realize that their death wasn't destiny. It was the result of 100 tiny free choices.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text specifically highlights Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. It notes that this film uses a random order of events. So let's apply Sartre to Tarantino.
Perfect example.
By totally jumbling the order of the narrative, showing the hitman Vincent Vega getting abruptly killed, and then showing him alive and well, eating breakfast in a diner in the next act, does the film essentially assassinate the concept of destiny? Does it make every single moment feel like a random collision of choices?
That is exactly the Sartrean connection, and Pulp Fiction is the perfect case study. By jumbling the timeline, Pulp Fiction completely strips away narrative destiny. Because you aren't being pulled along a smooth, inevitable river of plot, you are forced to look at the immediate morality, the violence, and the absurdity of the character's actions in a total vacuum.
It's just raw choice.
Exactly. Let's look at the diner scene at the end of the film. Jules, the other hitman, is held at gunpoint by a robber named Pumpkin. Chronologically, this happens in the middle of the story, but Tarantino places it at the very end of the plot.
Right, it's the final scene we see.
Jules makes a conscious, profound choice to spare Pumpkin's life. He chooses mercy. He chooses to try and be the shepherd. Now, if we saw this linearly, it would just be basic character development.
Right. He learns a lesson, moves on to the next scene.
But because of the nonlinear structure, we have already seen the consequences of the alternative. We have already watched Vincent, who rejects Jules' epiphany and continues his violent life, get unceremoniously shot to death in a bathroom.
Oh, wow.
So when Jules makes his choice in the diner, it's not because the plot needs him to grow. It's an isolated moment of radical free will. We are forced to evaluate his choice without the comforting safety net of chronological context, but with the heavy knowledge of what happens to those who make the wrong choice.
That is brilliant. It makes you realize that when you strip away the comforting illusion of the timeline, all you have left is raw human behavior and the terrifying freedom to act.
It's very exposing.
But taking away the timeline is one thing. Actively breaking the timeline, creating a scenario that shouldn't mathematically exist, is another thing entirely. And that brings us to the ultimate narrative trap: paradoxes.
The paradox. The research materials provide a very strict formal definition of a paradox, and it's important to establish this clearly.
Go for it.
A paradox is an argument based on seemingly true premises and a valid deduction, which nevertheless leads to a contradictory, logically unacceptable, or impossible conclusion. The most classic example in science fiction and time travel cinema is, of course, the attempt to change the past.
The famous grandfather paradox. You build a time machine, you go back in time, and you accidentally run over your own grandfather before your parent is even born.
Exactly.
So premise one, your parent is never born. Deduction. You are never born.
Yeah.
But if you were never born, who built the time machine and drove the car that hit your grandfather?
It's a complete short circuit of logic. It's a loop that results in an absolute impossibility. And the texts note that the core cause of a paradox lies in the duality of two arguments that both seem perfectly logical to our everyday linear thinking, yet when placed together in a nonlinear framework, they clash completely and destroy causality.
Premise one, I have a time machine, and I can travel through time. Logical within the world of the movie. Premise two, I can drive a car and hit a pedestrian. Also logical. Conclusion, I just erased my own existence, I do not exist, yet I am currently sitting in the driver's seat of this car. Completely impossible.
And filmmakers are absolutely obsessed with this impossibility. The texts bring up films like The Butterfly Effect, Edge of Tomorrow, and Premonition. These films don't just feature paradoxes, they build their entire architectural framework around these logical contradictions.
I have to ask why, though.
Yeah.
Why do we as an audience want to watch a movie that actively breaks its own rules? It seems like it would just be frustrating.
What's fascinating here is that paradoxes test the absolute limits of causality. They push our understanding of cause and effect to the breaking point. They aren't just logic puzzles. They ask the ultimate, deeply emotional human question.
Which is?
If we could go back, if we actually had the power to rewrite our timeline, could we avoid our mistakes? And perhaps more importantly, is it even desirable to try?
Well, let me push back on this a little, because I see this term thrown around a lot. Is a paradox just a fancy academic word for a random event in a movie?
No, absolutely not.
Like if a piano suddenly falls out of a clear blue sky and crushes the main character, that's completely unpredictable. It breaks my expectation. Is that a paradox?
That's a crucial distinction to make. A random event is just unpredictable or highly improbable within the established rules of the universe. A piano falling out of the sky is unlikely, but it still obeys the law of gravity. It has a physical cause, even if we don't see the helicopter that dropped it.
Okay, so what's a paradox then?
A paradox actively breaks the foundational laws of the film's universe. It creates a state where reality cannot logically sustain itself.
So a random event is a surprise, but a paradox is a total system failure. The code of the universe crashes.
Perfectly said. It's a system failure. And this cinematic system failure forces us to grapple with our own illusion of control. Let's really analyze the butterfly effect, since it's a prime example in the sources.
Yeah, that movie's intense.
The protagonist, Evan, discovers he has this neurological ability to jump back to specific time points in his childhood by reading his old journals. He can inhabit his younger body and change traumatic events.
Right, he had a horrific childhood, his friends suffered terrible abuses, and he wants to use this power to fix things. He wants to be the savior.
But the paradox becomes his prison. Every time he goes back and changes one tiny premise in the past, say, he prevents a piece of dynamite from going off, he creates a valid deduction, a brand new timeline.
And it never works out how he wants.
Never. That deduction inevitably leads to a horrific, contradictory conclusion in his present. He fixes one trauma, but inadvertently causes his love interest to become a drug addict, or he causes his friend to be sent to a psychiatric hospital, or he ends up losing his own limbs.
So what does this all mean for the concept of free will? We talked about Sartre saying we have radical freedom. But if Evan changes one tiny variable in the past and it completely ruins the future in unpredictable ways, does free will actually exist? Or is the timeline just this incredibly fragile, hostile trap?
That is the existential terror at the very heart of the time paradox. It suggests a terrifying limitation on Sartre's ideas. It suggests that while you might have the absolute free will to make a choice in the present moment, you have absolutely zero control over the causality cascade that follows.
You can't control the ripple effect.
Exactly. It suggests that the universe, or the timeline, is infinitely too complex for human intervention. The paradox becomes a massive neon warning label on the concept of regret.
It's like the universe is actively mocking him. It's saying, you think you want to rewrite the script of your life, but you don't even know how to spell.
Exactly. Or look at Edge of Tomorrow. The protagonist, Cage, is stuck in a time loop, repeating the same day of a brutal war against aliens. Every time he dies, he wakes up at the same time point.
The ultimate reset button.
Initially, it removes all consequence. He has infinite free will because he has infinite resets. But the paradox here is one of memory and progression.
Because he remembers everything.
Yes. He accumulates the memories and skills of hundreds of lifetimes, but physically, his timeline never advances. He is emotionally aging while chronologically frozen. The paradox forces him to experience the emotional weight of consequence, watching the people he cares about die repeatedly, even though the chronological timeline keeps erasing those events.
So the timeline resets, but his trauma doesn't.
Precisely. And this manipulation of cause, effect, and consequence is just one way filmmakers mess with our perception. The research materials detail several other categories of nonlinear disruption that blur the lines of reality even further, moving beyond just time travel.
Yeah, the sources categorize these beautifully. Moving from the purely chronological disruptions, we have the mixing of reality with imagination or dreams. We have the past actively interfering with the present reality. And we have the massive concept of parallel universes.
It's a spectrum of disruption.
Let's look at that first category. Reality blurring with imagination. The texts point specifically to films like The Sixth Sense and Stay.
These films are absolute masterclasses in subjective reality, and they prey on our implicit trust in the camera.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for the vast majority of the runtime, you, the viewer, firmly believe that the plot you are watching is the objective, factual story. You believe the camera is an impartial observer.
Right, seeing is believing.
But then the film introduces a climax or a revelation that entirely shatters that assumption. You realize the reality you were watching was actually an illusion, a projection of the protagonist's damaged mind, or a complete misunderstanding of their state of being.
Obviously, everyone knows the twist in The Sixth Sense, where Bruce Willis's character realizes he has been dead the entire movie.
Yeah.
How does a revelation like that fundamentally shift our understanding of the timeline we just watched?
It forces a massive retroactive reevaluation of every single time point you just experienced. This is where the viewer becomes the active editor.
Oh, because you start thinking back to every previous scene.
Exactly. Suddenly, conversations you thought were happening in real time, objective reality, were actually isolated supernatural events. Interactions you thought were physical were entirely psychological. The timeline wasn't just broken, it was fundamentally imaginary.
That's trippy.
It asks the viewer to question their own trust in their sensory perceptions. If the camera lied to you for 2 hours, how can you trust what you see?
It makes you rethink the basic mechanics of observation. Then you have the second category, where the past directly communicates with or interferes with the present. The sources mention the Age Adeline and the Lake House. I remember the Lake House, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock are living in the exact same house, but exactly 2 years apart, and they are somehow communicating through a magic mailbox.
Yes. In these specific narrative structures, time is not a sequence of closed doors that lock behind you. Time is presented as a permeable membrane.
Permeable membrane.
The past isn't dead and gone. It's actively whispering to and physically interacting with the present. This directly challenges the rigid Aristotelian idea that the past is absolutely fixed and only the future is open. Here, the past is fluid, alive, and capable of being negotiated with. It creates a deep sense of temporal intimacy.
And finally, we hit the big ones. Parallel universes. Films like Oblivion and Tomorrowland.
This is where we escalate from manipulating a single timeline to stacking multiple timelines on top of each other, happening simultaneously.
I want to stop and compare this, because I think the psychological effect on the viewer is so different depending on the tool the director uses. What is the fundamental difference between watching a film built around flashbacks like a classic noir versus watching a film built around parallel universes like a modern sci-fi epic?
That is a profound question, and it really gets to the heart of why these structures matter. If we look at the psychological mechanics, flashbacks are fundamentally about memory and regret.
Regret. Okay.
They are investigative in nature. They ask the question, how did we get here? They pull the viewer backward along a single thread to understand the trauma, the crime, or the catalyst that created the present moment. They are anchored in a singular, immutable reality that we are desperately trying to decode.
They're looking at the wreckage of a plane crash and trying to find the black box. The crash happened. We just need to know why.
Yes, exactly. Flashbacks deal with the weight of the undeniable past. Parallel universes, however, operate on a completely different emotional frequency. They are fundamentally about opportunity cost.
Opportunity cost.
They aren't looking backward asking, how did we get here? They're looking outward, asking the ultimate existential question, what if?
What if I had made a different choice? What if the universe branched left instead of right?
Exactly. Parallel universes challenge our deepest assumptions about the uniqueness of our personal choices and our core identity. If there is another version of you in a parallel universe living a completely different life, perhaps a better life, or a more tragic one simply because they made one different choice 10 years ago, what makes you the definitive version of yourself?
Wow. It dilutes the concept of a singular destiny and replaces it with an infinite web of possibilities.
It's a difference between agonizingly analyzing your past mistakes and confronting the paralyzing terror of your infinite potential. If every choice creates a new universe, the weight of choice is almost too much to bear.
It brings us right back to Sartre's nausea, the sheer, overwhelming scale of freedom.
It all connects. And just as a quick aside, the sources cover these philosophies in such depth, touching on a lot of differing worldviews on free will and societal structures. We're just reporting on the artistic analysis provided in the texts, but it's amazing how polarizing these ideas can be.
Absolutely. We're just looking at how they build the movies. So we've talked extensively about the philosophy. We've talked about Kant's cognitive lenses, Sartre's free will, Aristotelian logic, and the existential dread of parallel realities. But how do filmmakers actually do it?
Mechanically speaking.
Yeah. How do you take a concept as dense and academic as the opportunity cost of parallel existential realities and make it a popcorn movie that people actually want to watch on a Friday night? How do they technically achieve this temporal chaos without just creating unwatchable noise?
The research sources outline a very specific practical framework for this. They break the narrative structure down into 3 distinct layers. If a filmmaker can control these 3 layers, they can control time.
Okay, what are the layers?
They are the plot layer, which represents the story or the action. The dramatic layer, which represents the motive or the psychology of the characters. And the symbolic layer, which represents the overarching meaning or the theme.
Action, motive, meaning. Got it. So how do they manipulate the action layer?
To disrupt the plot layer and achieve that temporal chaos, filmmakers rely on a highly specific technical toolkit. The most obvious tool is, of course, nonlinear editing. This is the literal physical splicing of the film.
Like literally cutting it.
In the old days, they would literally cut the celluloid film strip with a razor blade and glue it back together completely out of order.
It's the physical manipulation of time. You're holding a timeline in your hands and chopping it up.
Exactly. The next tool is the technique of presenting multiple perspectives of the exact same event. The texts specifically mention films like 2.37 and Vantage Point. Vantage Point is actually a perfect example. In some international releases, it was literally titled 8 Angles of Truth.
Oh, I remember that movie. It revolves around an assassination attempt on a political figure.
Right, and you see the exact same 20-minute window of time play out from the perspective of the Secret Service agent, the tourist with a camcorder, the local police officer, the assassin.
It drives you crazy. But in the best way possible. Because with every new perspective, your understanding of the event radically shifts. You realize that the objective truth is completely inaccessible. Truth is just a composite of highly flawed, limited, subjective experiences.
It entirely destroys the classical literary idea of an omniscient, all-knowing narrator.
It proves that our perception of a time point is entirely dependent on where we are standing when it happens. Okay, so that's editing and perspective. What else is in the toolkit?
The third major tool is visual symbolism. When a narrative is aggressively jumping around in time, the director has to give the audience an anchor, a breadcrumb trail, so they don't get hopelessly lost. They use recurring objects, specific color palettes, or physical changes to anchor the viewer in a specific timeline.
Like giving a character a very specific scar on their face, or changing their hairstyle, or focusing on a piece of jewelry. If they have the scar, you immediately know it's the future timeline. If they don't, it's the past. It's a visual shorthand.
Yes, it bypasses the need for an on-screen title card that just says 5 years later. But perhaps the most subtle, insidious, and powerful tool in the arsenal is non-diegetic sound.
Okay, let's unpack non-diegetic sound for the listener, because this is a great piece of film trivia.
It really is.
Diegetic sound is sound that physically originates from within the world of the film, right? Like a character turning on a car radio or a dog barking in the background of the scene or the sound of footsteps. The characters in the movie can actually hear those sounds.
Correct. The source of the sound is visible or implied within the narrative space. Non-diegetic sound, on the other hand, is sound that the characters cannot hear. It's the orchestral score composed by Hans Zimmer, or the voiceover narration, or highly abstract sound effects added in post-production by a sound designer.
So how does adding a musical score create temporal chaos? Don't all movies have music?
They do, but nonlinear filmmakers use non-diegetic sound to actively create cognitive dissonance and a deeply eerie, disconnected atmosphere. They will deliberately mismatch the audio with the visual.
That's so.
They might play a slow, melancholic, romantic piece of music over a frantic, chaotic, hyper-violent scene, or they might use discordant, revidist audio like a cymbal crashing backward during a totally normal, mundane conversation in a coffee shop.
Oh, I hate when they do that. It makes my skin crawl.
Because it's supposed to. It creates a profound cognitive dissonance. Your eyes are seeing one reality, a calm conversation, but your ears, processing the non-diegetic sound, are screaming at your brain that time is warping, that something is fundamentally wrong with the reality you are watching. Sound can manipulate our perception of time's passing far more aggressively than visual cuts.
So what does this all mean? When you combine the physical splicing of nonlinear editing, the fragmented reality of multiple perspectives, the visual breadcrumbs of symbolism, and the psychological warfare of non-diegetic sound, what is the final product?
Well,
the research text actually gives us this incredible, seemingly totally unrelated note that I want to bring in here because it blew my mind. It mentions an art installation, specifically Anish Kapoor's Cloud Gate sculpture in Chicago.
Ah, yes, famously known by tourists as the Bean.
Right. And the facts in the source material are highly specific about its construction. It was constructed between 2004 and 2006. It was officially dedicated and installed on January 28, 2014. It is this massive 110-ton elliptical sculpture made of a seamless series of highly polished stainless steel plates.
It's quite a sight.
And it sits right in the middle of Millennium Park, perfectly reflecting the Chicago skyline, the people walking around it, and the clouds above.
Yeah.
Now, my immediate thought was, how on earth does a 110-ton steel beam in the Midwest connect to the cinematic philosophy of Sartre, Kant, and time paradoxes?
It seems like a massive leap, but it is actually the perfect physical manifestation of a nonlinear narrative. Think about what Cloud Gate actively does to physical space. Because of its elliptical, highly polished, totally seamless shape, it distorts reality. It bends light.
Yeah, it's like a funhouse mirror.
When you walk up and stand in front of it, you don't just see a flat mirror reflection of yourself. You see a reflection of yourself, yes. But you also see the person standing 30 feet behind you. You see the skyscrapers towering above you. You see the pavement below you. And you see it all stretched, bent, and presented simultaneously in a single, seamless, continuous loop of steel.
You're seeing multiple angles, multiple perspectives, and essentially multiple time points of reality in a single glance. It compresses the environment into one impossible image.
Exactly. It completely embodies a massive philosophical question posed in our texts. The texts ask, is it possible that our world, without appealing to a human conceptual system, contains contradictions within itself, alongside its time and space?
Whoa. Meaning, are the paradoxes actually built into the universe, regardless of whether we are here to perceive them?
Yes. CloudGate exists as a physical, tangible paradox. It is one solid, undeniable object sitting in a park. Yet it contains infinite, contradictory, warped reflections of the space around it. Nonlinear cinema does the exact same thing to time.
I see the connection now.
A movie is one solid object. It's a 2-hour reel of film or a digital file on a hard drive. It has a physical boundary, yet through its internal structure, it reflects the past, the present, the future, imaginary dreams, and parallel realities, all happening simultaneously for the viewer.
It's like the filmmaker is polishing the timeline so aggressively that it begins to bend and reflect upon itself. They're treating time as a physical material.
They are, and this connects beautifully to the final piece of academic literature noted in the sources. In 2012, a translated book by the legendary Russian filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky was published. The title of the book alone summarizes our entire discussion. It's called Sculpting in Time.
Sculpting in time. That is such a visceral, perfect phrase for what we were talking about.
Tarkovsky argued a very profound point. He said that while a painter works with the raw material of color and canvas, and a writer works with the raw material of words and syntax, the filmmaker's primary foundational raw material is time itself.
Time is the clay.
Precisely. Just as Anish Kapoor forged, welded, and polished 110 tons of physical steel to distort space in Chicago, a filmmaker uses editing, sound, and narrative structure to literally sculpt time. They carve out moments of silence. They stretch a 3-second explosion into a 2-minute eternity of slow motion. They compress decades of a character's life into a single smash cut.
They aren't just telling a story, they are sculptures of the fourth dimension.
That's beautiful, isn't it?
That completely changes how I will ever watch a movie again. It's not just a sequence of pictures, it's a temporal sculpture. It's an architecture of moments.
And the chaos of that sculpture, the sharp edges, the confusing reflections, it is all entirely intentional.
So let's bring this all together. We have journeyed today from the absolute safety of linear A to B chronological stories, the comforting highway of cause and effect, deep into the chaotic, paradox-filled puzzle boxes of postmodern cinema.
Quite a journey.
We've seen how filmmakers use the technical tools of nonlinear editing, multiple perspectives, and dissonant sound to translate the incredibly heavy existential philosophies of thinkers like Sartre, Rousseau, Kant, and Aristotle into gripping popcorn entertainment.
They force the viewer out of the comfortable seat of passive consumption. They demand that the audience step up and actively question the nature of objective reality, the terrifying reliability of their own memory, and the absolute limits of their own free will in the face of an infinitely complex universe.
But if we pull this out of the cinema and connect this directly back to you, the listener, why does this matter? Why should you care about the academic difference between story and plot, or the philosophical implications of a time paradox in a sci-fi movie?
You should care because fundamentally human memory is nonlinear. The way you experience your own life is nonlinear.
Wait, really?
Think about it. You do not remember your life chronologically. If I sit down and ask you to tell me the story of your childhood, you do not start at day 1 and recite every hour of every day in order. You couldn't, even if you tried.
No, of course not. You remember in flashes. A specific smell of rain on hot pavement triggers a vivid memory from when you were 10 years old. A random pop song playing in a grocery store violently pulls you back to a high school dance.
Exactly. We remember our lives in emotionally charged time points that aggressively jump back and forth, completely ignoring the linear clock on the wall. Our internal, subjective reality is a chaotic series of flashbacks of regret, flash-forwards of intense anxiety about tomorrow, and parallel universes of, what if I had taken that other job, or what if I had married that other person?
That is so true.
Therefore, nonlinear cinema, with all its chaotic jumping, its disjointed editing, and its seemingly impossible paradoxes, isn't actually an artificial cinematic trick. It is arguably the most honest, accurate representation of how the human mind actually experiences existence.
It's not breaking reality. It's finally accurately mimicking human consciousness. The timeline was the artificial construct all along. That is incredible.
It is the truest reflection of the human experience we have.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to explore on your own that builds on everything we've talked about today.
I'd love to hear it.
If films use nonlinear plots to expose the illusion of a neat, predictable timeline, think about the story you tell yourself about your own life. Think about your own internal narrative. Are you desperately organizing your memories linearly just to make them safe and easy to make sense of?
We all do it to some extent.
But what if the plot holes or the massive contradictions in your own past aren't mistakes or failures? What if they are exactly like the Cloud Gate sculpture? A beautiful, highly complex, seamless paradox that is simply part of the unique architecture of your reality. Next time you sit down in a theater and watch a movie that abruptly jumps back in time, ask yourself, is the movie broken, or is it finally telling the truth about time? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.